My name is Harry Kohlmann. I'm the founder and CEO of Park Street. I'm going to just give a little bit of a background for the route to market strategy. So I'm going to talk about the foundations. I'm just going to quickly highlight the overall market. And for those of you who know the US market, I'm going to contrast a little bit the European market versus the US market. And talk about a couple of compliance considerations before I'm going to hand it over to Ronan to talk about the strategies. So you look at the European market, it's 512 million people. It's a very large market. We have the UK still in here. Talking about the alcohol regulation in the European Union. Basic objectives of alcoholic beverage regulation generally is fourfold. One is fiscal, one is economic development, one is public order and safety, and one is public health. From a fiscal perspective, the EU itself as a body has never been involved in collecting taxes. So there is nothing of an equivalent of the federal excise tax in the United States. There are attempts of the European Union to try to harmonize excise taxes that are being collected by the states. But that is basically the only thing they've been doing. Questionable, the success, because they're still very widely across the different states in the European Union. From an economic development perspective, the EU has been active when they tried to, mostly on the wine side, try to help growers to possibly limit other growth areas, et cetera, in order to make sure that the supply and demand is in balance. But nothing really on the spirit side. When the European Economic Council was founded, which was a predecessor of the European Union, there was really no direct role given with regards to the public order and safety principle of regulation. So there was nothing where they might have gone in and said like, hey, we want to have a unified rule with regards to responsible consumption, et cetera. And the last thing here is the member states have been unable to implement practice and rules treating domestic and imported products alike on their domestic market. So therefore, the EU has basically tried to just use the Court of Justices to try to get to a more common market. Meaning, if somebody feels like that they were locked out of a particular market, the EU took that country or that regulation to court in order to alleviate the situation. So for those of you who know the US market very well, there's a three-tier system in the US with distinct distinct tiers of the manufacturing tier, the wholesaler tier, and the retail tier before going to the consumer. While on the EU side, there is a loosely harmonized country-specific system, meaning suppliers, importers, or multiple role players can sell to everybody, to wholesalers, retailers, and consumers. And so there is nothing that would prevent somebody from making a deal with an account in the same way, like you could do this, or you could not, or you'll be prevented from doing this in the United States. In some markets in the EU, you have got monopoly markets. For those of you who know the US, it's comparable to a control state where the government is still in the market. So you look at some of the Nordic states as examples for that. We talked about the size of the market from a population perspective before. If you compare that to the US, it's basically 58% larger. From a spirits consumption, it's only 15% larger. So the per capita consumption in the European Union is smaller, but overall the market is bigger. If you compare different states in the US, larger states like California, Florida, and New York, with the largest countries in the European Union, you look at a market like Germany, France, or the UK, that are basically all bigger than the biggest states in the United States. Choice for bottles in the US is a 750 ml bottle, which is not permitted in the EU. So you look here at bottles that are common, that are used in both territories, is the 1 liter bottle or the 1.75 liter bottle. But questions of like a 500 ml that is very attractive in the EU, that one is not permitted in the US. And the 750, as I said, it's not permitted in the EU. From a perspective of, the question we get a lot is this underfilling question. So if you have a 750 ml bottle, why can't you just put a little bit less in the bottle and therefore you keep the bottle the same? There is a directive that basically says of like how much underfilling you can do, and therefore that is really not an option you should pursue. From a label perspective, in the United States, there's a common label approval process, and once you have it, you basically have the security that you can use it. In the EU, it's a little different. So you can have a label that works in one country, but it could not work in another country. So for example, you see this little pregnant woman symbol there at the label. So that one, if you want to sell in France, it's mandatory, but in other states, it's not. But on the opposite side, you can actually go in and you can develop a label that works pan-European. If you put in these elements in there and you put certain warnings in multiple languages, then it's the pan-European label. So in order to make it easier to sell in a bunch of countries at once, and from a logistics perspective, generally, you can create that label. From a category consideration perspective, the EU actually also defines some categories, and it's in some instances it's different. I'm going to highlight just a few of them. For example, if you look at the non-flavored vodka, the minimum alcohol strength is 37.5 ABV, while in the US it's 40% ABV. For rum, it's very similar, and on the gin side as well. The taxation, coming one more time back. So on the EU side itself, there's basically like no EU tax, while on the country side, the country excise taxes, they are very widely and they can be very high. So you look at the ranges here on the right side, between 21 euros and 195 euros. That's a wide range of country excise taxes. And then the VAT that comes in, that is within Europe, it's included in the price. If you look in the United States, that price is always stated without the VAT in it. In Europe, it's part of the price, and that can vary also widely by country. So here, basically, the excise tax by country. So you look at a country like Sweden at 195 euros per 9-liter case of 40% ABV, and at the bottom there, Croatia, Bulgaria, or Romania at less than 30 euros per 9-liter case. So that's it, basically, from a perspective of the compliance background.